Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to this fabulous event. My name is Father Matthew Carnes. I serve as the director of Georgetown's Center for Latin American Studies, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you all today to this exciting conversation with Foreign Minister Roberto Alvarez from the Dominican Republic. Working with colleagues from the Walsh School of Foreign Service and the McDonough School of Business, especially our colleagues in the Latin American Leadership Program, and its director, Professor Ricardo Ernst, as well as the Georgetown Law Center and the McCourt School of Public Policy, the Georgetown Americas Institute aims to make Georgetown the premier academic setting for impact, dialogue, research, and study of the Americas. Harnessing our faculty's strengths, our student initiative, our Jesuit mission of service and solidarity, and our location here in Washington, D.C., we're prepared to reach out to the region in new, transformative ways, convoking discussions like this one that can have impact in lives across the hemisphere, embracing the diversity of our many communities, and unleashing the creative potential that they all share. Today's event contributes to the founding of our Americas Institute. It is one of the very first events we're having to signal this new, very important initiative here at Georgetown University, and it will contribute to this particular project. We could not be more happy than to have this chance to engage with our close friends and colleagues from the Dominican Republic, especially its embassy, from its Chamber of Commerce, who with Georgetown have had a long and productive relationship. Hosting the country's top diplomat here, hearing his vision for his country and for our hemisphere and the world, and then engaging with him in dialogue is so important to our shared future. Now let me just provide a few words of introduction. Roberto Alvarez has served in diplomacy for the Dominican Republic since 1966, from being the DR's foreign minister to the Organization of American States, from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to the Inter-American Development Bank. He served in nearly every major governing body and regional body at some point here in DC. In addition, Mr. Alvarez has been a professor, as well as a guest lecturer on human rights, international law in the US, foreign policy at several universities and academic centers. Between 2005 and 2008, he held the position of permanent representative of the Dominican Republic at the Organization of American States. And on August 16, 2020, he was sworn in by President Abinader as Minister of Foreign Affairs. He is the author of several books, essays, and articles on human rights and international affairs. He writes frequently for the Dominican newspapers as well as in the Washington Post, the Miami Herald, and El País. He received his master's degree in international relations from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He also holds a JD degree from the Universidad Autónoma de Santo Domingo and a master's in comparative law from our very own Georgetown University. Welcome back. Our program today will consist in some opening remarks from Foreign Minister Alvarez, followed by a dialogue between him and Professor Eric Langer. Professor Langer is a distinguished professor in our history department here at Georgetown University and the Walsh School of Foreign Service. And he's the former director of the Center for Latin American Studies. Over the years, he's cultivated a rich relationship with our friends at the embassy here and with many from the Dominican Republic, and he knows the country and its people incredibly well. After our first set of questions from Professor Langer, we will then have him serve as moderator, inviting questions from all of you. So as you're hearing the Foreign Minister speak, I invite you to be thinking of questions you'd like to pose to him later in the conversation. Before we begin, let me just say, please, too, if you wouldn't mind silencing your phones, that will help us to make sure that we don't have interruptions along the way. And now, with great pleasure, I want to welcome Roberto Alvarez to the stage, Foreign Minister of the Dominican Republic.
Is that all right to take this off? Thank you very much, Father Carnes. It's wonderful to be here this afternoon with you. And I want to thank Georgetown University for the invitation. Of course, Dominican Week for organizing it, and recognize our ambassador to the United States, Mrs. Sonia Guzman, and ambassador to the Organization of American States, Josue Fiallo. Somehow I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. There are many faces, many friends here this afternoon. Thank you for coming. I also thank Ricardo Ernst, who made it a point to welcome me. He had to leave to teach a class, couldn't be here, but in any case, thank you. The title of my words this afternoon are "The Dominican Republic, a Shining Star in a Troubled Region." I wish that it were a different situation in the region than what we find nowadays. But in any case, I am going to speak first about democracy, particularly in the Dominican Republic, then about Dominican economy. Then I'll talk a little bit about geopolitics and the DR's location. Then I can't help but, of course, speak about Haiti, and then I'll wrap things up. The Dominican Republic, the last election of last year was the 11th consecutive election since 1978. They haven't all been perfect. However, even in the troubled ones, we learned and we advanced the democratic process. And I must say that, harken back to 1978, which was the first free, fair, transparent elections, in which Ambassador Guzman's father won the presidency of the Dominican Republic. And it was a very important event, not only for the Dominican Republic, but for the region. There is a certain consensus that the third democratization wave in Latin America, Huntington's, started in the Dominican Republic in 1978. This election led over time to what we find today, a consolidation of democracy. There's been a process of sedimentation over time, which has many factors which have led to this situation, this stability, this transfer of power in a peaceful way. And a certain amount of protection of human rights, which has been also a struggle, but which has reached the point now that our government, the government of President Abinader, has made a central part of his presidency, among others, the defense of democracy, the fight against corruption, and so on, but I'll get to that. Amongst the factors that have led to this stability in the Dominican Republic today are several. One is a certain awareness in the political, business sector, religious sector, an awareness that compromise is required in order to maintain stability and reach another level, advance the democratic process. That has been essential in that awareness, that consciousness of the Dominican leadership. That the economic development of the country has been another factor. We have been growing at 5% for over the last 50-some years. There have been only a few years, 4 to 6 years, in which our economy have not grown. And only four of them have been mainly due to external factors. That development process has helped to consolidate a middle class, which has been essential to Dominican democracy. So, strong belief in the democratic process, economic growth, robust middle class have been essential to Dominican democracy, but also the relationship of our country to the United States. The cultural factors, there are many, including our diaspora, which is maybe including those of Dominican origin, but had been born in this country, over 2 million now and counting. That has been a very important factor in this democratic process. The cultural pull and the relationship has been very important. You go throughout any town in the Dominican Republic when Major League Baseball is in season, and you will find people gathered everywhere watching, whether it's Boston Red Sox or the Yankees or the Padres or whatever. It's very difficult to measure the importance of this in the democratic process, but I absolutely believe that this has been also a very important factor. And by the way, I also need to thank Carlos Guillermo Flaquer, Vice Minister of Industry and Commerce, and my assistant, Anselmo Muñiz, who have been sort of important Socratic members of this process. U.S. influence on the DR has also been another important factor in this process. U.S. assistance, U.S. Dialogue with the authorities, with the business sector, and with everyone basically throughout society. And it was Carlos Guillermo who pointed out that Dominicans, this is something we know, but are happy people. If there is a word that describes Dominicans, it's alegre. And lo and behold, it's very difficult to be alegre under a dictatorship or under an authoritarian government. So this has been also a factor that has been important in that development. Dominicans, struggle. But one thing that they want to do is they want to, in a good way, they want to party. They want to have a good time. That is essential. And that has led to this stability that I've been speaking about. So with this overview, elections took place in 2016, and President Abinader was able to not only achieve a 53% of the vote, but was also able to capture the imagination of Dominican society in terms that we needed a change, a sea change, if you will, in the way that we approach politics. One of the maladies that we had, that our democracy had been corruption, but basically impunity. There's corruption everywhere. But impunity had been really eroding at the base of our democratic process. And people were voted in 2016 precisely to try to change that situation. And this commitment by President Abinader has been a central item of his presidency. He promised and has delivered on appointing independent prosecutors, in selecting independent judges to so-called high courts of the Dominican Republic. And he has made it a point to stay out, to not send messages to the judicial sector or to the prosecutors as to the way they must either decide a case or who they should prosecute. And that has led to a very new situation in the Dominican Republic where many highly placed individuals from the previous government, including brothers and sisters of the former president, are now under investigation for corruption and for influence, peddling while in government or in positions of power. This is an unwavering commitment of President Abinader that we must stamp out impunity, and so far he has been able to deliver. Fortunately, several countries, organizations have stood alongside us, our government, the United States, European Union, and international organizations like the United Nations have helped and are working closely hand in hand with our government in order to make sure that these processes are institutionalized. The president has proposed a reform, constitutional reform, in order to assure the independence of the prosecutors and the high court, but I don't have the time to go into that at this moment. Let me move on to the economy. A lot of people still think that the Dominican economy's main exports are rum, sugar, coffee, and indeed they are. We do export, and we export tobacco. As a matter of fact, lots of tobacco. It's a mainstay of the Dominican economy. However, so far this year, January to August of this year, medical and pharmaceutical devices have topped the list of our exports, over $1 billion. And they are, at this pace, they're going to beat 2019 exports. As a matter of fact, I believe that exports this year are going to set a historic record over 2019, historic record. And possibly our exchange business, our trade with the United States will top probably about $14 billion. Is it $14 billion? Our bilateral trade. These numbers are impressive. In 2019, if I'm correct, we were the 6th or 7th trading partner of the United States in Latin America and the Caribbean, after Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Peru, and then the Dominican Republic. This is something that we should make it better known than we do nowadays. But our third largest export is electric and electronic devices. It's already reached $762 million for the year. So, as a matter of fact, as Carlos Guillermo was pointing out, it's possible that many of the light switches that you turn on and off in your homes now are made in the Dominican Republic. Our exchange of all of our exports, 70% come to the United States. This is one of the importance of the U.S. market to the Dominican Republic. Now, we have recovered so far all lost jobs in the manufacturing sector of the Dominican Republic. All jobs that were lost due to the pandemic have now been recovered. Perhaps about 75% in the tourist sector, which is the last one to recover. However, basically almost every market that sends tourists to the Dominican Republic have now opened. Recently, Russia, Canada have reopened. So we expect record numbers in 2022. About how many Francesca, how many, what will be the total number, hopefully, of tourists in 2022?
If we go at the rhythm that we think we might, we would be in the region of Punta Cana, over 7 million passengers.
Over 7 million, just in Punta Cana. Okay. Thank you. Well, we've been helped by the fact that President Abinader and Vice President Raquel Peña, who's in charge of our health cabinet, really went to the mat in terms of trying to get vaccines from wherever they could. We now today have 57 to 58% of our population with 2 doses, about 70% with 1, and 11% with a third booster, with a booster shot. This has led precisely to this opening, allowing countries such as Russia, Canada, to open their skies to the Dominican Republic, and it led the State Department recently to lower the travel advisory to the Dominican Republic from 3 to 2. Very important. If tourists continuously look at the travel advisories of the State Department. So the government purchased with the help of the private sector back in October of last year, 10 million doses of AstraZeneca at $4 a dose. In January of this year, the delivery dates established that it was set that the first delivery would occur March 21st of this year. But in January, AstraZeneca let it be known that they were not going to be able to keep their delivery dates. That led to a scramble to find vaccines wherever we could. We were asked in the Foreign Office to start finding wherever available. My first call was to the Foreign Minister of India, Jaishankar. And they, first of all, sent us a donation of 30,000 doses, which allowed us to begin vaccinating the first-line responders. That really was a very important moment in the Dominican Republic because it led to the belief that there was hope, that indeed that we were not in a never-ending dark tunnel. Also, they allowed the purchase of 125,000, I believe, extra doses of AstraZeneca made in India. Then we could not find any in Russia, the Sputnik, but eventually the Chinese Sinovac vaccine became available. And the government purchased 10 million doses at $19 a dose, plus $2 for transport. So $21, the most expensive vaccine at that moment. That led to started the vaccination program at the numbers that we now see today. After that, we were also allowed to purchase, we were able to find Pfizer and some Moderna vaccines, but only later on. Then AstraZeneca, in around June, July, started delivering on their contract. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, we had an excess number of vaccines. And given the shelf life of the vaccines and the excess number, particularly due to the largesse and collaboration of the private sector, we were able to donate about 820,000 vaccines to several countries in the region. So far, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries in the region have received or are in the process of receiving the vaccines. So, of course, in terms of our economy, again, the linkages with the United States, foreign direct investment from the United States is one of the main sources, in addition to tourism, as has been pointed out a number of times. The United States was essential for the partial recovery of the tourist sector in the Dominican Republic during this year and during the pandemic. Most of the flights and most of the tourists actually came from the United States. So as we now approach this new situation post-COVID, starting post-COVID recovery, and as we now face the recovery, one of the great challenges today is where to find access to liquidity in terms that don't lead us into an indebtedness which may end up in another lost decade. This, I think, is one of the challenges that we are facing in Latin America, how to be able to recover without, again, falling into this debt trap. So far, there are several proposals floating around as how the thing is not the indebtedness in terms of the capital, but the interest rate. The 3 to 5% extra interest rate is what is basically is the burden. The repayment of the debt interest is up to close to 30% of our income. That is untenable. So this situation, there are proposals about special drawing rights, about the amounts going to the developed countries, or perhaps putting them in a basket that can be used by multilateral financial institutions. There are other proposals, but I, unfortunately, at this point, don't have time. But this is an essential issue which must be looked at urgently. And then it leads to the possibility of this, what is happening to the global supply chains. And this issue that is being referred to as nearshoring or friendshoring or production sharing and so on. This is an issue which the Dominican Republic is, because of our location, because our ability in our free trade zones and basically throughout the economy to produce quickly, to supply within a few days to the United States, places us in an incomparable situation. So this is the issue of the location now of the Dominican Republic that we're trying to gain greater visibility. However, it would seem that in order to gain visibility, you have to behave badly. I don't want to mention countries, but you know which countries are getting special treatment nowadays. So given that situation, we decided to call on countries that are democracies, that have open economies, that trade with the United States, that value democracy, human rights. And recently, the presidents, the foreign ministers had already met previously, and the presidents just met last Wednesday in New York, presidents of Costa Rica, Panama, and the Dominican Republic. And we have established an informal alliance. One of the main objectives is precisely to gain visibility. And we have numbers and reasons to gain that attention. As I was pointing out recently, we added up bilateral trade with the United States 2019, 2020, and so far 2021. 2.5 years of numbers, bilateral trade of those three countries with the United States. If we were one country, it would place us in third place in Latin America after Mexico and Brazil, ahead of Colombia, ahead of Chile, and we, the three countries, are just 20 million people. Colombia is 50 million. So numbers speak for themselves. And numbers are important. But we also must sell ourselves. And that is the next step. But the intent is not to close ourselves into a small group. We hope in this informal alliance to reach out to similar democracies in the hemisphere and continue to join forces. Because unfortunately, the authoritarian tide is going in the opposite direction. And that is one of the hard issues that we must resolve today. In the 1980s, when CBI, the Caribbean Basin Initiative, was created, the tide was the opposite. We were going from dictatorships into democracies. It seems now that we are in an opposite wave. So we must address this and determine how it is that we best can collaborate under these unfortunate circumstances. Finally, Haiti. It is the position of the Dominican government that conditions do not exist today to hold elections in Haiti, that it would be a very detrimental under the current violence, current level of instability, that you cannot hold a free, fair, and transparent election, that you need to at least lower the level of violence of the gangs to a point where they will not influence election results. Under the current circumstances, if you were to hold elections, because of the control of territory that these gangs have, the possible outcome is that members of criminal organizations will then end up in Congress. Then what do you do? So first, the violence, the level of violence, has to be minimized. Then it's up to the Haitian people to decide. Most of the leadership in political leadership and business have basically made it known that they all believe that a constitutional reform is required in order to eliminate the prime minister's office and just have a presidency. Does it lead to the stalemates that have occurred over the years, among other constitutional reforms? Then they can have a constitutional reform, create some type of economic development plan, and then have elections. In other words, in our view, you need anywhere from 12, I don't want to set a time frame. It is, again, for the Haitians to decide, but it has to be at least 12 months out for elections, for conditions to be created for elections to be held. Our concern is that gangs in Haiti have reached a level of autonomy from political sectors, that they have started to confederate. And that level of autonomy has many potential dire consequences. And that is one of the great concerns for the Dominican Republic. Stability in Haiti is our national security depends on that stability on the other side of the island. We want nothing more than to have the best relations with Haiti. We are bound together forever, and we have a strong level of interest on both sides in having a stable economy, a stable politics, and we will continue to work towards that end. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any interest at the international community level, and that is one of the things that we're trying to change. Unfortunately, again, very difficult. So far, we just don't believe that having been at the United Nations General Assembly recently, having spoken to the Secretary General, the Assistant Secretary, the Undersecretary General, and other presidents, it doesn't appear to be at the Security Council level, the interest in the Haitian situation. People are fatigued by Haiti, and but you've seen what's been happening. It's a regional issue now, and it will continue to be. The foreign minister of Panama told us that so far this year, 80,000 Haitians have crossed Panama. 80,000. It's a wake-up time. Otherwise, it's only going to get worse. So, however, I was around in 1978 when the Panama Canal treaties were signed at the OAS, and I vividly remember the number of dictators that came to the OAS for the signing of the Panama Canal treaties. And that passed. And this moment will also pass, because in the end, democracy, human rights will prevail. I have no doubt about it. But it won't happen by simple good wishes. We must strive for it every single day, relentlessly. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarkable comments and deep engagement with so many of the issues that so preoccupy us and inspire us here in our region. Now let me turn this over to Professor Eric Langer for a bit of dialogue, and then we'll open this up to questions and answers from our community gathered here. Thank you very much.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to hear from you and your very interesting summary of what's going on and all the successes really that the Dominican Republic can show, and I think that's really amazing. And I think the Dominican Republic, as I think you said, is really an example for the region. But I'm going to ask you some questions about things that you didn't mention as much.
Make them simple, easy.
Easy, okay, of course. And one is, you are in a tough neighborhood, and clearly, as you mentioned, Haiti, I think, is probably the principal concern here, especially because not only is it a national security problem, but it also drags down the Dominican economy simply because you don't have a partner with whom you can work on the other side of the island. But I'd like to maybe expand that a little bit, and since you were talking about how your administration is really trying to promote democracy in the region, is ask you, especially, I mean, there are certain cases, Venezuela, there's also Nicaragua and Cuba, which are clearly dictatorships in one way or another, and perhaps ask you in particular about what you see happening in Nicaragua, what the Dominican Republic's reaction to that is, because as we're seeing is a deterioration of democracy, if it even exists there anymore, and what your stance then is as a country, because you're also so closely tied to Nicaragua through DR, CAFTA, and all of that. So it seems to me that that probably is another very big concern for your country.
Well, first of all, we don't have any magical solutions. nor can we don't believe, we only believe in peaceful solutions to current conflicts in the region, number one. That is very important. And actually, that has been one of the important, essential, I think, contributions of the Organization of American States throughout decades and decades, which has been precisely as at the meetings of ministers of foreign affairs to find, through dialogue, solutions to the conflicts that have arisen. Unfortunately, the OAS has now become somewhat so polarized that it is very difficult to find a consensus within the OAS that can help, that can contribute to the situations in these countries. We need to prepare already for what appears to be the possible outcome in Nicaragua of the elections. And I say appears because, of course, we all know about the number of people in jail, the number of candidates who have been jailed, including one who over many years has been a friend, Arturo Cruz. So we just need to continue to support every avenue possible of dialogue in the case of Venezuela. In the case of Nicaragua, we don't see that happening, quite the opposite. It seems that there had been a hardening of positions instead of an opening of the government. So as you can see, I'm flailing at giving you a good answer because I just don't think that we have one.
Okay, so to follow up, I see that things are moving along with Venezuela. At least they're talking right now in Mexico. And I know that the Dominican Republic has contributed a lot to these conversations because you've held them as well in your country. And maybe your take on whether you're optimistic or not, if something will happen that will promote democracy and fairer, probably is the only thing one can hope at this point, elections in Venezuela. I know I'm asking you the hard questions here, but I figure you are the person to ask. So
this is a friendly audience, unfortunately. So we support the negotiations. We hope that they will reach some type of agreement that will allow most of the opposition to participate in the November elections. I think that this is what you need over time when you have such polarized groups, as in Venezuela. You need confidence-building measures, and that requires time, and that needs personal attention, personal contact is the only way that you can actually achieve that. So we are more than willing to participate in any way that it's within our means to move along to help the process as observers, as outside participants, in whatever way that we can help the Dominican Republic, the Dominican government, the government of President Abinader, as I said, truly believes in peaceful solutions, and we will be at the table if asked in any particular, I'm not saying in the case of Venezuela, in any difficult situation.
You're being very diplomatic, which is, I guess, your job. Perhaps another question to expand it even further. As you know, the United States has been moving for a while now to a reset in relations with China. What it seems to me that there's the potential for little countries to get caught in the middle of that. And the Dominican Republic, which has, as you mentioned, overwhelmingly good relations and also commercial relations, mainly with the United States. What do you see the role of China within the Dominican Republic and perhaps within Latin America as a whole, if you, and I'm not sure if you're willing to go there, certainly you can't necessarily speak for other countries, but if you kind of see what China's role will be in the future and whether you see this as positive and what your thoughts would be on China.
Well, we have seen the evolution of the U.S.-China relationship over the years. I think there came a moment of awareness in the United States as to that things weren't necessarily going the way towards a democratization, the way that the United States had hoped that would happen with China. After the Chinese in 2015 published their Made in China Plan 2025. We have seen, again, the issues in the South China Sea, the level of the tariffs that then President Trump imposed on China, and how, unfortunately, then new issues, recent issues, the 5G, the clean network issues, Huawei. Well, look, our strategic relationship is with the United States. We have diplomatic relations with China, which the previous government established in May 1, 2018. We hope to have the most friendly relations with the Chinese, with the clear understanding where our main interests lie. And this is a daily situation which you can't give a single answer to such complex issues. We had to buy the vaccines, as I said, because it was a life or death matter for the Dominican population, and that's where we found the vaccines. It had nothing to do with ideology or any other issue other than the fact that it would have been suicidal not to have purchased those vaccines. So it depends, again, on each issue as they come up. What we would like, hopefully one day to see, is to find that the U.S. and China find some way to collaborate at the international level and hopefully minimize this conflict. Unfortunately, today, I personally don't see that happening.
Okay, great. What I'd like to do now is open it up to questions from the audience who are probably going to ask much better questions than I did, which is fine. Please, if you do have any questions, I'd love for you to make nice brief questions and not declarations, because that sometimes happens, as you know, so I'd be happy to open this up. I would prefer to have students actually ask questions, so please feel free if you have a question to let me know, and then we have somebody here who will pass you a microphone.
I thought they were all students.
Almost all. Some are a little bit older than our normal students, but most in fact are. Yes. Over here, Jessica. And if you could please say your name and your coordinates, whatever.
Hi, my name is Jessica Castillo. I'm from Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, and I'm currently a first year in the Masters of Latin American Studies. My question is towards the title of your talk, which is Dominican Republic as a shining star in the region. I personally believe Dominican Republic is a shining star, but sometimes in mainstream international relations and in a political community, it sometimes gets overshadowed by the giants of the region. How do you see the Dominican Republic becoming much more of a mainstream shining star in the region?
There are many reasons, Jessica. Size matters. You cannot compare a country of 130 million like Mexico with a country of 10.5 million as the Dominican Republic to begin with. The relationship, let's just take as an example, Mexico, relationship with the United States is incomparable to our relationship in terms of you have, what, 5,000 or so kilometers of territory border, of land border. The trade is just, the numbers are of another magnitude. Same with Brazil and so on. But you have to get your house in order. And that's one of the things that is happening first. I'm reminded of a famous statement by former Speaker of the House of the United States, Tip O'Neill, said, all politics is local. Foreign policy, it begins at home. So if we are known, excuse me, as having truly independent powers, a separation of powers, a truly independent judiciary, and this is going to take time. This is President Abinader's there's commitment, but he's been in office for a year. But also having a foreign service that is not a, they say botín político, yeah, thank you. We've been working at changing that by having a truly sort of professionalizing, transforming our foreign service. It's the face of the nation, and unfortunately, it has not been the best face in the past. So that is also another issue that needs to be resolved. And then again, there are many intangibles at home that one has to work on, fairer, more equitable distribution of income, better social services, just a whole bunch of things, Jessica, that we are on the way, sort of taking many big steps, large steps in that direction. It just takes time.
Thank you. Let's see. Right here, yes.
Hi, thank you, Foreign Minister, for speaking with us today. My name is Felipe. Can you hear me okay through the mask?
So far?
Okay. I'm a second year in the Latin American Studies program, and for my question, I was hoping to ask for more details about your country's and your government's recovery plan for 2022. Does it focus on any sectors or industries, or could you share some more information with us about that today?
Well, the mainstay of the Dominican economy nowadays is manufacturing in terms of our exports. And obviously, the agricultural products are also an important, very important, tobacco, as I mentioned, but also there are many others. We have a lot of, how do you say, invernaderos? Is it hothouses? No. Greenhouses.
Greenhouses.
I think hothouses are something else.
It sounds good anyways.
Greenhouses. We export a lot of organic products, and we have yet sort of a larger, much larger capacity in that area. Of course, cacao, coffee, and so on, and et cetera. But our manufacturing export has a huge sort of expansion, possibility of expansion. That is where we're, with the issue of nearshoring, hopefully we'll be focusing on. But again, today, the main source of income today is our tourism industry. And this is essential. That is why the recovery of the tourism sector is something that we're working on to stabilize, and we need to diversify it. How exactly? Well, these are issues that need to be worked on. But those are the main areas of the economy. Of course, we also depend to a considerable degree on remittances. Our Dominicans abroad have been sending remittances in ever larger quantities. We wish that no Dominican had to leave the country. This is what we're working towards, hopefully one day having enough decent jobs so only Dominicans who want to travel abroad for whatever purpose, tourism or educational purposes or whatever, but that don't have to leave. But meanwhile, we have to be highly thankful that remittances this year are going to top, I think it's $8 billion. This is precisely, I think, is it 8 or 9% of GDP? It's about 8 or 9% of GDP. But anyway, I just needed to mention that is an important component of our foreign exchange income.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Genesis. I'm a second-year student in the Latin American Studies program, and my question to you has to do with the fact that we know the pandemic has no borders, and you spoke a lot about Haiti's political and social instability. We also know that Haiti has extremely low vaccination rates and alarming COVID cases that can potentially cause threats to the Dominican Republic, mostly in the form of variants that are not that are not immune to the vaccines that currently exist. And so I'm curious to know what the Dominican government is thinking or discussing to address that issue that the pandemic is posing to the Dominican Republic.
Well, first of all, anyone who walks into a vaccination center gets a shot. No questions asked. And that has been the policy from the very first day by the government. Secondly, we offered a certain amount of vaccines to the Haitian government. Unfortunately, because of the level of violence in Haiti, it is very difficult to carry out a vaccination campaign under those circumstances. And there is nothing that we can do, we, the Dominican Republic, in terms of that, other than wait for an international organization, whether it's the World Health Organization or the Pan American Health Organization or other institutions to step in and hopefully help along that in that respect. They received donations from the United States, I believe of Moderna vaccine, but in any case, the offer that we made, they have not been able to use it thus far because of the lack of, I said, it seems, of capacity to use them within the time before the vaccines expire.
Well, thank you so much. We need to move on with the program, so we're going to put the seats back and then move on with that. But thank you very much for your excellent answer, your candid answers.
And before we wrap up, first of all, thank you very much, Foreign Minister Alvarez, for those really important remarks and the answers to the questions. It makes such a difference for us to hear straight from you and from President Abinader's administration. So thank you. That is so important to us. I also want to just echo the fact that in our new Americas Institute here at Georgetown University, we are striving to address issues that you raised over and over again. Democracy and the rule of law is one of the fundamental pillars. Economic growth and innovation, a fundamental pillar. Social and cultural inclusion, a fundamental pillar. So please know you have very willing partners here at Georgetown University who want to work with you in these efforts. Now, before I conclude, I'd like to invite forward Mr. Roberto Alvarez, the president of the American Chamber of Commerce of the Dominican Republic, and also the organizing committee of the Semana Dominicana, of which this event has been a part. Mr. Alvarez.
Thank you very much, Father Barnes. It is really very little I have to say, apart from the greetings that have been made, but just thank you, Minister Alvarez, for once again enlightening us with all your knowledge and expertise on matters that are of interest to this House of Knowledge. I want to thank the University of Georgetown again for opening its doors once more to Semana Dominicana and the American Chamber of Commerce, and allowing us to hold this event in such a great venue, such a great and memorable space. Thank you very, very much. I'm sure the students here have learned a lot this afternoon. So have we, the not so younger students still in the audience. So with that, thank you. I really do not have anything else to add, but just to say thank you very, very much, and that you can rely and continue to count with our support at the American Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much.
So that will bring to a close our event today. Thank you all for coming, for making this such an important start to our Georgetown Americas Institute, and for further deepening these bonds that we share between the people of the Dominican Republic and Georgetown University. Have a wonderful day, and thank you again, Foreign Minister Alvarez.